Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Africa Today, where we get you the latest news and events taking place on the African scene. And we will start off with our major top stories and reports. President Sisi calls upon major countries' support for Africa to reduce food instability. More details in this report.
In his speech at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit closing session on promoting food security and food system resilience, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said that the world has not had success in eliminating hunger around the globe, as international reports indicate the hunger rates have begun to increase over the past 3 years. President el-Sisi shed light on Egypt's vision to enhance food security in the continent, and President el-Sisi called for adopting development mechanisms to reduce the debt burden in a way that eases this burden for the African nations through writing off or swapping external debts or easy repayment. He added that the second pillar of Egypt's vision is to intensely agricultural investment directed to Africa to develop productive and storage capabilities through using moderate technology on favorable terms. Their president called upon major countries to support African countries to maximize their benefits by investing in infrastructure and agriculture projects in a way that enhances the integration among the countries through the African Free Trade Agreement. Presidential spokesman Bassem Rodi said that the second U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which was held in Washington, reflects the growing international interest in the African continent. In a TV statement on the sidelines of the summit, the presidential spokesman said that the African continent has huge potentials in terms of resources, raw materials, and human capacity. However, the spokesman said the continent lacks infrastructure, particularly when it comes to transportation networks, including roads, inter-country links, hub cities, maritime routes, and direct flights. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi participated in the summit alongside approximately 49 heads of state and senior government officials from the African countries. The president also held a series of meetings on the sidelines of the summit, including with U.S. President Joe Biden. The first edition of the summit was hosted by U.S. President Barack Obama in 2014.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're delighted to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Souaid Chalabi, former assistant to the foreign minister. Good afternoon. Ambassador Souaid, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Ambassador Souaid, presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassem Rodi said that the second U.S.-African Summit of Leaders in Washington reflects the growing international interest towards the African continent. How far is this shown through the summit?
Well, we have seen in the past week, in the 3-day summit, that a lot of interest was given to Africa because of its resources and because of its raw materials and agricultural land, because of the whole world was suffering because of the Ukrainian-Russian war, because of the the shortage of crops and food insecurity that happened during the past 6 months. That is why the world is looking up to Africa to solve this situation, because Africa can and is able to produce a lot of the crops and to save the world from the food insecurity. Mm-hmm. If there are mega projects that are invested in Africa in the agricultural sector, so that is why there was a highlight in the U.S. African Summit on the agricultural security, the food security, the energy security, which Africa is able and is willing to help in solving the world from this crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ambassador Souaid, the President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi called for developing a mechanism to reduce the debt burden in a way that ease the burden for the African nations. Well, this can take place through swapping external debts. How far is this applicable or possible in your opinion?
Well, this has happened before in history when when the big powers have sensed the importance of protecting the developing countries from the debts and the debt burdens that were very that were suffer, made their economies suffer. So this is like it needs the political will of the big powers, the heads of the big powers in the G20, and that is why Africa now is represented in the G20 by the acceptance of the big powers. So the role of the African Union is great in order to convince those leaders of the G20 to soften the burdens of the debt and to do a replanning of the debt for the developing countries, because mostly the African poor countries are the ones who are in debt, and they are unable to their economies are unable to secure the payments on time with the interest rates that are high, and especially now with the crisis, the energy crisis, the food crisis. There are no jobs. There is inflation. There is that is not only in Africa but all over the world. So if the Western countries and the big powers are able to secure their economies, but the developing countries are going to suffer a lot, because they are the ones who are producing the raw materials and the agricultural products that are needed for the economy. For the trade.
Yes.
So the big powers have to support this initiative of President Sisi to alleviate the burden of the loans and the debt and the burden of the interest for future sustainable economic relief of debt. This is something that it has to be discussed, and it has to be discussed with the World Bank, with the IMF,
Yes.
and with the support of the big powers and the political will of the leaders of the Western countries who are giving us the debt, who are giving the developing countries and taking the high interest rates.
Yes. Well, President Sisi also emphasized on the second pillar of Egypt's vision, which is to intensify agricultural investment directed to Africa to develop productive and storage capacities through using modern technology and favorable terms. How was this met by the summit?
This is a very important initiative also, because, as you know, in order to gain profits from agricultural projects, it has to be a mega project, and it has to be to use mechanization and digitalization of agriculture. So this sector is very poorly behind in Africa, and it has to be really looked into by big companies who are investing in Africa in this field, because actually only one country in Africa, Sudan, for instance, if we take it as an example, it can feed the whole world if it is properly invested in agriculture. If their land, because they have enough water for irrigation, they have arable lands. 60% of arable lands in Africa are not used, so it can be it can be invested in. It can be used as the main supplier of
Yes.
crops, agricultural crops to the whole world, and it can fight the food insecurity that we are facing now. And the fertilizers also can be also produced by these countries in Africa.
Well, since 2014, Egypt has placed the African continent on the top of its priorities and, of course, on a firm conviction in its African identity and a belief in its long-standing ties. Would you please shed light on Egypt's role in the African continent since 2014?
Well, you have seen that Africa in our strategy, in the Egyptian political strategy, is a top priority. President Sisi has been to all the summits of the African Union, has been in bilateral and multilateral engagements in order to secure peace and security. He has requested water security, food security for all the countries in Africa, and he has and also the Egyptian government and the Egyptian private sector have been involved in many projects. For instance, in Tanzania, the Egyptian government is helping Tanzania to build a dam for producing electricity. And in other countries, there are many private companies that are engaged in helping the African economy. So
Yes.
it is our responsibility, and we take it as the brothers and sisters of Africa to offer them training courses in all kinds of sectors in life, health, and irrigation, and even military and police courses. We are offering them to the African countries. Since 2014, we have been increasing all the numbers of trainees who are from African countries coming to be educated. We give scholarships, and also we have invested a lot in the relations with mostly all African countries, especially Nile Basin countries and the countries in the Horn of Africa. So that explains why we have been offering Africa, because this is our top priority in our strategic political endeavors.
Well, I would like to thank you very much, Ambassador Suaid Chalabi, former assistant to the foreign minister. Many thanks for your insight. And dear viewers, now we move back to our special reports, and specifically on tourism. Minister of Tourism and Antiquities Ahmed Issa revealed a set of figures and statistics related to the tourism sector in Egypt. More details.
Minister of Tourism and Antiquities Ahmed Issa revealed a set of figures and statistics related to the tourism sector in Egypt, explaining that his ministry plays its role as an organizer and supervisor of nearly 8,000 tourist facilities. The minister clarified the ministry is working on studying the challenges faced by the sector in order to reach 30 million tourists, noting that the highest tourist rate reached by Egypt was 18 million tourists in 2009-2010 season, followed by a decline in the rates to rebound in 2019 before being affected by the repercussions of the COVID. The Ministry of Tourism spent £800 million on promotional campaigns abroad during the fiscal year 2022-2023, in addition to £850 million to support and stimulate direct tourism aviation, with a total £1.65 billion. The Minister of Tourism and Antiquities explained that the amount spent is not considered large compared to the volume of the huge work produced. The minister affirmed the state's interest in developing cultural tourism and increasing the targeting of cultural tourists interested in archaeological sites and museums because it is a competitive advantage that Egypt enjoys due to its archaeological sites, museums, treasures, and monuments.
Well, dear viewers, that brings us to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up here on Nile TV International.